Hello, thank you for joining me. I'm Lynda Lamp here, and I'm here to do the Q&A with you today. I do have a couple of questions that have been submitted, and so if you have a question while we're on here live today, you can text me at 907-351-3003, or you can call me at that same number. And I can put you on speakerphone and you can just ask your question live. That would be another option. Welcome, Amber. I'm so glad to see you here. Thank you so much for being here. And I think we got a little backed up on or confused on some of the postings. I need to go and clarify that the Q&A from week 8 is really the Q&A for week 7 and week 8. So that's just one little housekeeping detail I wanted to tend to. So let's see. Let me start with a couple of questions that have come in. On page 247, I write, "We understand our frequency and we control it. And the question is, I'm not sure how to control my frequency. I think it has mostly to do with my thoughts." Well, definitely it has to do with your thoughts. And I think the easiest way to think about your frequency is to work on it when you're doing meditation. That's a time where it's very easy to focus on your frequency. And if you do a meditation where you're focusing on loving feelings or feeling love coming from your heart, you're going to feel your whole body respond to that at a cellular level. And so, our frequencies, if you go back to the David Hawkins chart that we talked about, and let me get one in front of me real quick. And thank you to Mary for joining us. Let's see here. I'm pretty sure I have that scale here. And if not, we can either Google one real quick or I can just do it off the top of my head. Basically, the lower frequencies of 100, 200, they're frequencies of guilt, anger, fear, resentment. And then as you move upward, you get to love. I think that's Shabana that just joined us. I'm going to Google it very quickly here. It's, scale, map of consciousness, right? Map or scale. And so, yes, shame is at 20. Guilt, apathy is up to 30. Grief is at 75. Fear is at 100. Then we have desire. Anger is at 130 or 50. Pride is at 175. Courage is at 200. Neutrality, 250. Willingness, 210. Acceptance, maybe 230. The pixelation on that is not so good when I'm zoomed in on it. And then when you get to, so acceptance is 350. Willingness is 310. Reason is 400. Love is 500. Joy is 540. Peace is 600. And enlightenment is 700 to 1,000. There are other scales now that suggest that when you achieve Christ consciousness, that there is no end to the scale, that it's unlimited, basically. So when we're talking about frequency, we want to be doing our best to live from a place of love or above. I mean, neutrality is nice, willingness is nice, acceptance is pretty good, but ultimately, if what we are is divinity in form, then we're going to achieve the experience of divinity in form if we can keep our frequency at love or above. So yes, Amber's saying that makes sense. Focus on frequency while meditating. And then, that's why it's helpful if you can meditate first thing in the morning, because you can set your intention for the day. Then you go into your meditation and you do your meditation where you basically cement it. And then you can go through your day, and that meditation and intention will help influence and guide you throughout the day. So if you have any more questions about that, go ahead and put them in the chat. I'll go ahead and go on to the next question. Is from page 260. Energy flows where our attention goes. And so the question is, so if someone is worrying about something, can they inadvertently make it their reality? This is a little tricky in terms of concepts, because at one level, what's happening here is divinity is having an experience in 3D of us, through us. And it's difficult to know what exactly divinity is intending at any given moment. And that's why it's so important to try and be in yourself in the moment. That way you've got the best clue. You're the most connected at that point to divinity and what's happening. And you have the best chance of experiencing the intended moment as intended. When we worry, first of all, because there's no such thing as time, you're bending yourself and you're going into a place either ahead of yourself or behind yourself, depending on what it is you're worrying about. If you're worrying about something you've done, that's taking yourself into the past. If you're worrying about something about to happen, then that's taking yourself into the future, neither of which exist in any real sense. But what you're also doing, again, is you're setting your frequency. So if you're worrying, and I don't think worry is actually one of the stated, but I think that basically fear is what worrying is. When you're worrying about something, you're afraid of something. And so you're at about 100. And the view of life is that it's frightening. So we can set up what I call frequency echo chambers. And I have a little video out on YouTube that you can look at. If you go to the playlist about the book videos, it's in there. There's a couple of short videos that I would suggest viewing because they graphically describe what I'm going to try and explain here. But basically, if you're living from an open heart, then the energy around you can flow and the universe can send you things. But if you're living from a closed heart, you've basically walled yourself in. And by doing that, you will end up experiencing similar things over and over again because you've put these walls up and you've basically energetically created an echo chamber where the things that you worry about are going to be the things that you're experiencing, because life and divinity thinks that's what you're asking for. It's a hard thing to grasp, but where your attention goes is where the energy flows. And so if your attention is on things being frightening, then the energy is going to flow in that manner, and you will continue to see life in a frightening way. You've got to break that cycle in order to see something different. And so in the video, what you'll see is I've got green hearts and red hearts. The green hearts are the open hearts and the red hearts are the closed off hearts. And you'll see I do a graphic where as energy is flowing, it comes up to a red heart. But because everything around the red heart is in this I don't like what's happening mode, it's walled off. And so the energy can't get through, and it just passes on, and it goes and it finds a place where it can get through. And that'll be to a green heart that doesn't have the walls up. So let me go back and read your question again. So in terms of making it their reality, making it their experience, definitely making it their experience. That doesn't, when you look at it from a point of divinity having the experience, everything that's happening is a part of this grander play that we're in, and we're playing our role. If let's take something extreme. Let's say you're worried about somebody murdering you. The problem with thoughts like that is that the universe can't tell whether you're wanting it or not wanting it. All the universe gets, all the energy picks up on, is the frequency of that worry about that event. You're focused on that kind of an event. And in general, the way the universe works is it will give you more of that. So we need to take our fears and we need to turn them around into gratitudes about something else, so that rather than being fearful of something, we're being grateful for something else, for something different. And when you get into a state of mind where you're in a place of gratitude about things, then that's when the universe can really open up and give you things, because you're focused on it, and the universe will focus on it with you and will just give you more things to be grateful about. Okay, so those are the two questions that I had on hand. And let's see, let me check and make sure if nothing's come in on the phone in terms of additional questions. So I do encourage you. Okay, so Amber says, okay, so I've been worried about getting the COVID vaccine, and I don't want to make something awful my experience because I'm worrying. Right. So definitely what we want to do is what you want to do is, as much as you can, calm your mind about this. Now, I don't know what you're specifically worrying about. I don't know whether you're worried that you're going to get it and you're going to get sick, or it'll make you sick. I'm not sure if you're worried about not being able to get it. But in all times like this, when there's something that we're facing that wants to bring up worry in us, what you might find it helpful to do is, okay, so long-term, the after effects and long-term. So instead, try to shift your focus from a completely different angle and try to look at it from a place of gratitude for the opportunity to, specifically in terms of the vaccine, how about being grateful for the opportunity to aid in the virus's demise? Because that, in theory, is what everyone getting their shots is going to do. And so everyone would like to restore our lives to some semblance of normalcy. And for everyone, that will be a little different. But being able to go to a movie theater is something I would enjoy doing. I happened to be somewhere in a big city the other day, and I had some time to kill, and I realized, well, you can't do that, right? Because those things aren't open yet, that I'm aware of anyway. And so each of us has something that we would like to go back to some sort of normal because of this virus. And so being grateful for the opportunity to participate in taking steps that will allow us as a society and a humanity to get back to normal is one thing that can make you feel better about it. And I completely understand fear of the after effects, fear of long-term. We don't know anything about it, do we, really? And we don't know anything about the long-term effects, for sure. And for those of us who have ever taken any one of these drugs, that when you read the long paper that comes with it and you get down to this thing about, I just remember this from I think it was an antibiotic that a dentist gave me once about 15 years ago. And it said something about 20 years from now, I forget what organ it was, liver or something could fail. How do they expect us to take drugs and tell us things like that, right? And with the shots, we don't know. I mean, at least then I had a decision I had to make. And in most cases, what you do at that point, because the present moment is what's pressing, and at that point, I was in extreme pain and, needed this dental work done. I went ahead and I took those pills. Now, what I haven't done is I haven't spent the last 15 years worrying about those pills, because what will be, right? There's great peace in knowing that it's really not for me to know. It's for me to make the decision in the moment, and then divinity gets to have that experience, whichever I chose, right? Divinity would have had the experience had I chosen not to take those pills as well. And either way, it was a right choice, right? There are no wrong choices here, because it's divinity, because that's what's happening. We're here for the experience. And so finding a way to be grateful. If you're meant to get shot, you won't drown. Exactly. And that's the other thing. It's another teaching that I think is really very handy. I'm going to use it the way Neil Donald Walsh describes it, because I think he does the best job with it. Nobody ever dies at a time and place not of their choosing. And I fully, truly believe every word of that statement. So revel in the grandeur of the divinity of what's happening here, and find a way to allow your heart to smile every day, regardless of what life is presenting. And I'll tell you, I'll be very transparent here. That has gotten difficult for me. Reading the last bit of this book was a good reminder for me. It reminded me of some things that in this last year or so had gotten a little hard. And recently, my experience of life is that the 3D world seems to be very difficult to interact with. Things are stubborn. Like I go to open a car door and it doesn't want to open, or it wants to shut, or my finger gets slammed in it or something. And I put something down and it falls over. I pull something down and it rolls away. I don't know what's going on, but I allowed myself to get a little sucked into that. And I discovered that what I'd been doing was being in resistance to my experience. And that was a big wake up for me, because we need to always, if we can, stay present and stay conscious to the fact that everything's happening here is divinity, and it's a gift. It may not feel like a gift, it may not look like a gift, but it's a gift. And if we can keep our sense of humor and our hearts open, we'll have a much happier experience of this 3D world than if we're constantly frustrated by the things that are falling over or rolling away or tripping over or whatever, or that we're bumping into, or whatever it may be. So I hope that's helpful to share that perspective. Light language. Okay, so Amber was saying that you've covered language, and I heard someone mention light language. So let's just look up what the definition of light language is. Okay, so here's the top article that says, well, there was a quick summary, and then when I clicked on it, I lost the summary. Let me go back to the summary. Light language, because that is how it appears to the inner eye as the practitioner is speaking. Interesting. Many believe light language is the tongue we spoke before we embodied. It's an ancient and futuristic form of communication used for lifetimes that resonates with, let's see, a form of communication that bypasses human limitations around the meaning of words. That, to me, makes sense. Light language is a multidimensional language that is understood by all on a soul level. So that is the best definition I've read so far. And what I would say is that, language is, spoken language is how we communicate here for the most part in the 3D dimension on planet Earth. But how we communicate in other worlds, or how other worlds communicate with each other, may be completely different. And I know that we can also communicate telephonically, telepathically rather, I mean. And many people can actually have conversations telepathically. They're still using words in their telepathy, I believe. But we are light beings. And so we are a frequency. And it makes sense that at some level, we would be able to communicate through frequency without words. So I don't know if that's helpful, but that's my take on it. That reminds me, though, was there something from this chapter, The Limitation of Language, that we wanted to talk about? labels, that was one thing that came up in the discussion afterwards. It's truly unfortunate what happens, especially to children, because of the labels that we tend to put on them. I have a friend of mine who tutors elementary school children in reading. And some of the challenges that these kids are having, there's nothing wrong with children. There's nothing wrong with anybody. They may not be behaving within the norms of society, but that doesn't ultimately make them wrong. It makes them misunderstood, first off. And maybe if we were to approach all problems from a place of, let me understand better, instead of let me label you, we would have a completely different society. And I'm guessing, but I think it would probably be a happier society, because we don't understand. We should listen more to children. Absolutely, we should listen more to children. And I love listening to children that are preschool, after they've gotten their words, but before they've gone off to school. Because that's still an age where they're connected to everything, where they're connected and they can see energies that we can't see. That's, so many people think their imaginary friends are imaginary friends. They're not. They're real friends. Just because we can't see them doesn't mean they don't exist. And that's just one little tiny piece of it. That's why I love to talk to little children. Oh, absolutely. They're definitely often more wise as children than adults are. Definitely. Again, because they're still connected to source. They're very pure. They can tap into it. And they're operating from their hearts. They haven't shut down yet. They haven't walled off yet. And the real key, I think, as adults, is to create a society and a world where they don't have to shut down and they don't have to wall off, and that they're allowed to grow up and become the beings that they want to become, instead of becoming the things that we want them to become instead. I think a lot of moms do their daughters a disservice by calling them their mini-me's and fashioning themselves after the mother. I think that a lot of little girls don't get to express their real selves because of that kind of overbearing adulthood. Let's see. Okay, so Amber says, I also wrote down, you said you are what you have thought yourself into being. Can you elaborate? So we become what we think about. Norman Vincent Peale, and let me think, there are several authors that have made names for themselves with that basic premise, and they're right. Thoughts are things. And so what ends up happening is, as we think, we are creating. As we speak, we're really creating. But as we think, we are setting the groundwork for the creation. And so what you focus on, it's like where your attention goes, the energy flows. It's the same idea. What you're focused on is what you are basically drawing to you, creating for yourself. And that's why it's so important not to be focused on things like lack and scarcity, but instead be focused on abundance and plenitude. Because again, if your energy's going where, what your reality is going to show you where your attention has been flowing, if you're focused on lack and scarcity, then that's going to be your continued experience. And the minute you shift it around and you become grateful for what you have, and even become willing to give away a little of what you have, suddenly you become inundated with more of what you need. So I'm trying to think of, there's a very famous quote that goes along with this idea of what you are, what you've thought yourself into being. Because we do become what we think about. And so, yes, Amber, we need to watch our thoughts. Absolutely. We need to watch our thoughts, catch the judgmental ones, and correct them. Exactly. And so that's why the real focus has to become staying present in the moment and heart-based. And there's lots of ways to do that and lots of tools. And that's what we'll get into in the next volume of the book. But basically, it becomes a constant focus. If you want to stay heart-based, to stay in your heart and stay in the moment. And it's very easy to get tripped up by the ego, because the ego is constantly there, working in the background, trying to keep you safe, trying to keep you on point, trying to keep you doing the things that the ego thinks you should be doing. And so there is this sort of internal challenge taking place, and it requires attention and dedication. And it's why it's so easy to just go back asleep and be on automatic pilot and let your ego just take over and run the show and not think, right? It becomes very easy just to let go and not think. You receive the results of an unconscious life when you do that. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? Many people go through their entire lives that way, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's entirely up to them, and it's entirely their choice. And divinity is having just as much fun no matter what. So there's nothing wrong with that. The only thing that's lacking is likely a sense of fulfillment and joy. And that's why it's preferable, if you can, to stay focused. That's right, Amber. It's a practice. Exactly. We need to stay in the moment, and it's a practice. And our ego is definitely our default setting. And so let's talk about that for a few minutes, because it's easy to get angry with the ego. It's very easy to get annoyed and to think, okay, my ego's in the way, or I'm being egotistical, or whatever. What we need to do is create a healthy relationship with our ego, because there are things about our ego that we should appreciate. It is a part of our wiring. And the parts of the wiring that we really need are essential. We wouldn't survive without them. So it's not a matter of getting rid of your ego or somehow living outside of your ego or ignoring your ego. You need to cozy up with your ego. And you need to realize and recognize when your ego isn't serving you. Those are the moments that are important to identify. When your ego is taking care of you, you want to be grateful to it. And it does a great job. 80% of the time, it's doing exactly what we need it to do. It's that 20% where it's trying to run our lives that we'd probably be better off without. So, and those are the places we do need ego to be here. We definitely need ego to be here. We wouldn't survive without it. It is what keeps our housing alive. right? Remember, you're a spirit and a soul inside of some housing. And the ego is a part of the housing. It's not a part of your spirit or your soul. Your housing, however, has an agenda that is dictated by the ego, and that's to keep you alive. And so we have defense mechanisms, and they're built right in. And that's what they're there for. They're there to protect us and to keep us happy. So, not to keep us happy, but to keep us safe and intact, if you will. So when we know our ego is participating in things that we would prefer they didn't, is, for example, if you're having a spiritual discussion with somebody and they make a point about something, a teaching point, and you say, okay, but that but is most likely a function of your ego, wanting not to hear, wanting not to change, wanting not to embrace whatever this comment might have been. Because the ego doesn't like to change. And the ego is afraid of change, because if you change, then the ego is afraid it won't know what to do. Who will you be? Who are you if you've changed? It's irrational, but it's the way it works. Our ego can be irrational. Let's see. Amber says, somebody recently said that our ego goes with us when we die, not when we are in heaven, though. I don't resonate with that teaching. Our ego is a part of our housing. So our ego dies with the housing. Our spirit and soul do not have egos. The ego is not a part or a function of your spirit or your soul, as far as I know. The ego is directly related to the wiring. It's directly related to the actual housing. And it's both a physical and spiritual mechanism, both, but only within the housing. And I didn't say that right. It is a physical and psychological, not spiritual. It's a physical and psychological part of the housing. So when the housing ceases to function, the spirit and the soul return to source, the ego of that housing goes with the housing. There is no carryover, if that makes sense. Okay, let's see. Is there anything else? Yeah, right. That's good. So Amber says that's comforting that the ego doesn't chase us into the grave or well beyond it. Right. No, we can be done with the ego in this lifetime, and you won't have to deal with the ego again until you come back into form in another lifetime, should you choose to do that. Or, you may come into form somewhere else and they may have something besides the ego that you'll have to learn to deal with. I don't know. There's the possibilities are endless. Thank God, right? Absolutely. Definitely. Remember, the definition of abracadabra is I create as I speak, or as I speak, I create. So let's see. We did the chapter on getting out of your way as well, and that's really the key, right? Getting out of our own way. And I love Steve Maraboli's quote, get out of your own way, stop the paralysis by analysis, decide what you want, create a simple plan, and get moving. So, Earl Nightingale, that was the other name I was trying to think of earlier. You are now, and you do become what you think about. And that's, he was another author around the turn of the last century. And then Wayne Dyer, remember that your natural state is joy. And let's talk about that for just a second. That came up in the circle that I lead earlier today. The distinction between joy and happiness. Joy, the state of joy, is our natural state of being. And what that means is that internally, there is a place where all is well, always. That place, I believe, is something that gets lost and clouded over. And I think if we go back to the conversation about children, it happens around the time that children start to go to school, sort of that 6 to 7 age. Prior to that, I think you can see joy in children most easily. And certainly not all children and not all circumstances. Not all children are having joyful lives, even when they're little. But those who have had the experience of, a good upbringing, a good environment in order to live, if you watch them, those children, those little children, they know joy. They are living examples of it. It's internal. It's not in your head. It is a real feeling and a knowing. Happiness is more of the whole experience kind of feeling. You can be in a state of joy in the midst of a tragedy or a disaster. You're not going to be in a state of happiness in the midst of a disaster or a tragedy. And that's the distinction I'm trying to illustrate, is the idea that joy, that real state of joy, is something that is constant and totally internal. And when you found it, it's very hard to lose it. It's not easy to find it. That's where the work comes in. That's where the spiritual work comes in. But if you do the work to find joy, which is really, it goes hand in hand with the work of self-love. When you get to that place, nothing will rock your world in a bad way. Nothing will upset you in a way that you can't cope. You'll be rock solid in your experience because you'll be so grounded in joy. Let's see. So, yes, and Mary says, children laugh hundreds of times a day on average. Exactly. And how often do we laugh on average in a given day? Most adults would say not very often. And happiness, or laughter rather, is a medicine. It is an actual medicine. And so if you do have anything wrong with you physically, laughing is one of the best ways to help heal your body. It's a chemical process, and it really works. It's true, it works. Yeah, thank you, Amber. And yes, Mary, I tend to laugh a lot as well, and I make a point of watching. Like, I watch shows that will make me laugh, because it's important that every day we spend some time laughing. People don't make that a priority, and it should be a high priority. And hopefully it's humor, like society's evolved and our humor has evolved. It's very hard for me to watch humor that I watched years ago, because especially some of the more slapstick and laughing at people hurting themselves, laughing at other people's demise is not a very evolved level of humor. And so one of the things that is good, if you can, is to look for more evolved humor where you're laughing more at a joke or a funny moment, as opposed to somebody being put down, if you know what I mean. But it is a great medicine. And you can, especially if you're fighting something, some kind of cancer or illness of some kind, it's been proven scientifically that people who have watched or laughed, not necessarily watched, you can read things that are funny. You can have people tell you jokes. You don't have to necessarily be watching something, but patients who used laughter as medicine healed and recovered faster than patients who don't. So that's a fact. Yes, Amber, we do. We do. We take things way too seriously, and things become tragedies. We lose our keys, and it's a nightmare. Mary, laughter yoga. I love laughter yoga. It's perfect. And laughter clubs. Yes, post-pandemic. But, maybe some people should be doing laughter clubs on Zoom even. It might be a fun thing to try and do. Although there is something, Zoom is great, but there is something about being in a room of people laughing that is so wonderful, just so wonderful. I enjoy being with other people and laughing, and I enjoy making other people laugh. I think laughing is one of the best tools we have. Let's see, we've got about 10 minutes left, and it's infectious. It is infectious. That's one of the great things about laughter yoga is you get into a laughter yoga thing and you start laughing and everybody's laughing. It's very infectious. I love it. We have about 10 minutes left. Does anybody else have something they'd like to talk about? Let me check the phone. I don't see any messages coming in. Let me check email as well. I don't see any emails. I didn't ever say that, but I think everybody that's on here knows if you want to submit a question, it's questions@walkingthroughyourwalls.com. What I can do is we can talk about what we're going to read coming up. Pillow fights. Yeah, that's good. That's good. So on this next Sunday, I'm not sure if we'll get all the way through it. but we'll start with putting knowledge into practice. It's the supplement section of the book. And I think there are 7 exercises or supplements that I included, basically to map to your chakras, that are tools that you can use to start the process. Volume 2 of this book is filled with all the tools that are out there to start walking through your own walls and putting the knowledge into practice. But this will get you started till that book comes out. So I think if we don't have any other questions, I'm going to say thank you to everybody for being here today. And I think we'll go ahead and wrap up for the day, if there isn't anything else. Thank you to Mary and Amber for being here and being so supportive with your comments and questions. I love it. And in the meantime, if you want to submit a question for next week, it's questions@walkingthroughyourwalls.com. You can message me at 907-351-3003, text or voicemail. And the websites are lyndalamp.shop and lyndalamp.com. Until Sunday or next Tuesday, namaste and much love. Thank you so much.